Hey guys, welcome back to Meghan Grace DIY. Today's tutorial is going to take part in 3 separate series. We're going to be making a button-up shirt that can be used for day wear or for pajama wear. I'm going to break this tutorial down into pattern preparation, shirt construction, and then shirt finishing. We are going to follow a commercial pattern, the New Look pattern number 6197. This comes with both a men's and a women's shirt, and it can be made sleeveless or with sleeves. This is a great project for beginners because you learn a lot of different techniques, like how to attach a collar, how to do a button-up, and how to inset a sleeve. Now, I do intend on doing a separate video just on how to read patterns, but for the sake of figuring out how much fabric you need and what size you are, you want to go to the back of the pattern envelope and measure your bust, and then line your bust up with what pattern size you would be. For me, I would be an 18 or an extra large in the men's size. Once you've determined your sizing, the back of the envelope will also tell you how much fabric you need. This is going to be determined by if you're using 45-inch wide fabric or 60-inch fabric. But if you have any questions, just check with the person at the counter cutting your fabric. For this specific video, I'll be making option B, which is a lady's shirt with sleeves and a pocket. From our pattern, we're going to need to cut pieces 10 through 16. Piece 11 is the pocket, and that's optional, so you don't have to use that if you don't want to. And then below this, it gives you ideas of how to lay out your pattern pieces correctly on your fabric so you don't waste any fabric and make sure all your pieces get cut properly. But beware, make sure if something says cut on the fold that it actually gets cut on the fold. Here's all my supplies. I've got my pattern in the middle, and I picked a silky solid from Joann Fabrics in this really cool celestial print. I actually ended up ordering 3 yards instead of the 2 1/8, so that way I could make some cute little pajama shorts when I was done. I'm also going to need about a yard of interfacing, and you know me, I like to use Pellon Shape Flex woven interfacing, and I'll need 5 buttons. You could use 6 buttons if you want, if you're a little bit taller like me, and then your buttons should be anywhere from 5/8 to 1 inch wide. And then of course you need some thread, some scissors, and some pins. Oh, and a sewing machine. I'm going to walk you through each of the pattern pieces that I've already cut out. This is the front of the shirt, it's pattern piece 10, and it's cut to not on the fold. This is the back of shirt, piece 13. As you can see, this is cut on the fold, so you have to make sure that you cut this piece directly on the fold so it'll unfold into one large piece that'll cover the entire back of our garment. Here we have piece 16, the sleeve, which is cut 2. Here we have the yoke pattern piece, which goes on the back of the shirt, as well as piece 11, which is the pocket. Both of these are cut 1. And then lastly, we have piece 15, which is the facing of our shirt, and then we have the collar piece. Piece 15, you cut 2 in your fabric, and then 2 in your interfacing. And then the collar piece, you cut 2 in your fabric, and only 1 in your interfacing. Now at the start of this video, I said there'd be 3 parts. The first part's going to be all about preparing our pieces to be constructed into the garment. Firstly, we're going to start with ironing on our interfacing. Now, I've already pressed my interfacing to the inside of both of the facing pieces for my garment. For the facing pieces, we do need interfacing pressed on both sides. Now for the collar, we're only going to press interfacing to one side. Now while I get myself here set up to press my interfacing onto my collar, I decided I wanted to introduce something new to my videos. Now as a teacher, I get to see a lot of finished products in the classroom, but I really don't get to see a lot of finished products from you guys out there that are using my videos to make things. And I really do love it when you send me videos or pictures of things that you've made. You can send me a video or a picture at meghangracediy@gmail.com and I'll feature it in a video. So our very first feature is from a subscriber named Molly, and I don't want to pronounce her last name wrong, so I'm not going to try, but she made some really adorable Disney-themed masks with some super cute rhinestones on the bows. Of course, I approve of rhinestones, so I just wanted to say, great job, Molly. I think your mask came out fantastic. At this point, I've got my interfacing fully fused onto the wrong side of my collar, and I only need it onto one piece. Right here, I want to make a quick recommendation. I always keep a lint remover on hand to get any extra little threads off of my ironing board. This fabric in particular is shedding like absolute crazy, almost as bad as my cat's, so I give a quick little rundown on my ironing board and it keeps things nice and clean for me. Now let's line up the two pieces of our collar with the right side kissing the right side. Once I've got the two pieces nice and even, I'm gonna take the collar pieces and pin them together, starting in my corners, and we're gonna end up sewing both sides of the collar together and the longer end of the collar. The shorter end of the collar is actually gonna remain open for this point in time. I'm over at the sewing machine with my stitch length set to 3, and all commercial patterns usually have a 5/8 inch seam allowance. Now when I get to my corner, I'm gonna do something called blunting. I'm gonna sink my needle, I'm gonna turn, and I'm gonna sew 3 stitches at a 45-degree angle before sinking my needle again and then turning to continue down the straightaway. The reason we do this is so the seam allowance doesn't get all bunched up into that nice little pointed edge. And believe it or not, even though you think it'll be flatter, you'll get a pointier collar in the end. I'm going to continue sewing down my straightaway. Something might happen to you that's happening to me here, which is because I have interfacing on one side of the collar, the top layer of the fabric that doesn't have the interfacing is stretching and not quite lining up with the interface side. See here how I have a little bit extra? So what I'm going to do to fix that is just gently pull, this is called easing, to make sure that the two layers do line up in the end. You don't want to pull too hard though, or else you'll get some wibble wobbles in your stitching, and we don't want that. Now, when you get down to your next corner, you're going to blunt again, which is sinking your needle, turning at a 45-degree angle, doing 3 stitches, and then sinking the needle again, turning towards the other side of the collar, and we're going to stitch all the way down to the bottom. You're going to keep sewing down to the bottom edge, and then you're going to backstitch. We're going to leave the wider end of the collar open, and that's how we're going to flip our collar inside out. This here is my blunted edge. See how my stitching goes a little bit diagonal? Feel free to go ahead and cut off some of your seam allowance around that corner. That again is going to make it easier to flip your collar inside out and give you a pointier edge and in the end a more professional finish. Now we're going to move on to the last step of prep for our collar. We're going to understitch the long side of the collar. So that way the underside of the collar rolls gently underneath and we don't really see a seam when our garment is finished. Are you a little bit confused on understitching? That's okay. If you click the link above, it'll take you to a separate Back to Basics video where I show you exactly what understitching is. For this collar in particular, you're going to get as far into that corner as you can, but you probably won't get all the way into the corner. We're pushing our seam allowance towards the interfaced side of the collar. Remember, you want to keep tension to make sure you have no bubbles underneath while you're sewing. And you're going to keep sewing as far into the corner as you can, but again, you won't get all the way into the corner. You'll probably stop about an inch short. I know it's tough to see since I did sew in black, but you can see my understitching right along the seam. No bubbles, nice and flat. Now we need our iron to really do some work. I'm going to take the collar and I'm going to flip it right sides out. You can use a tool such as a point turner, or in my case, a pencil, to help push your corners out to be pointy and crisp. I do want to warn against you using your scissors to push your points out. I know it can be tempting because they're sitting right there, but it's so easy for the tip of your scissors to just go swoop right through that point, and then you've got to redo your collar. Now I'm going to take some time to press my collar nice and flat. You can't see the understitching, it's on the other side of the collar, but I'm gently pulling the uninterfaced side downward to make sure that seam is not right at the edge of the top of the collar, but just underneath. I'm going to take a minute to clean up my excess threads and any of the little hairs that are hanging off the bottom of this piece. But I do want to mention really quick that, as you can see, my print is going horizontally across the collar, not vertically. I went according to grain line, but if you were doing this yourself, you could flip your grain line 90 degrees to make sure that your pattern was going vertically instead of horizontally. You can also see here a nice clear up close view of my understitching. And now that we're done prepping the collar, we're going to move on to our pocket. You can do 1 pocket, 2 pockets, or no pockets. It's up to you. Start by pressing over the top edge of the pocket about 3/8 of an inch. Next, you're going to need your pattern piece. We're going to mark the fold line that's approximately 1 inch down from the top. I'm going to do this by putting 2 tiny little snips on each edge of the fold line, but you can also do this with tailor chalk or by using tracing paper and a tracing wheel. To give you a preview of how this is going to work is we're going to go to the sewing machine and stitch down that 3/8 of an inch fold that we first pressed. Then we're going to fold the pocket top backwards and stitch it down on the sides. That way it'll flip right side out and it'll automatically finish off the top of the pocket for us. Let's start at the sewing machine by straight stitching down that original fold we made at about 3/8 of an inch. This fold should be going towards the inside of the fabric, so you're making a fold of the right side fabric over touching to the wrong side of the fabric. Next, we're going to fold back the other way so the right side's touching each other along the fold line I just had you mark with the pattern. We're going to place that underneath the presser foot and we're going to stitch at 1/2 inch down each side of the pocket, all the way down. Even though you've passed that fold line, you're going to keep going until you get to the bottom. Then let's repeat this step on the other side. Lastly, to prep the pocket, we're going to stitch a 1/2 inch stay stitch line along the bottom part of the pocket. Basically, these 3 lines that we sewed are going to serve as our marks for when we press the pocket at the ironing board. Now that we're at the ironing board, let's flip the top of the pocket right side out. Once you've got the top and the points successfully flipped, take your iron and press it nice and flat. Now you're going to use each of those 1/2 inch stitch lines that we sewed as marks as to where to fold our pocket in. This is to prep to sew the pocket onto the shirt. Let's fold the side of the pocket in just so that stitching would be inside of the pocket, or basically behind the pocket, and press that flat. You're going to go ahead and repeat this step on the bottom and on the left side. And once you're done with your pressing, we're going to put our pocket aside for a later step. Let's put some darts in the front of our shirt. You can see the dart marked here on pattern piece 10. If you're making the male version of this shirt, no need to follow this step. First, we have to mark our dart. We need to mark both the ends of the legs and the apex of the dart. I like to mark my dart by snipping at the end of both of the legs, and then I use a pin to mark the apex. Most people like to use a piece of tracing paper with a tracing wheel to mark their darts. Again, totally up to you. And if you've never done a dart before, go ahead and click this link that's going to show up above, and I'm going to do a video that's a little bit more in detail as to how darts work and how to properly construct a dart. Darts are responsible for shaping a garment. You want to make sure you construct your darts properly so that way your garment fits correctly. You never want the dart to be too long and you don't want the point to reach the apex of the bust, because then your shirt will just end up looking a little bit funny. Now that I've marked my dart in the 3 important places, I've got my dart here folded in half, ready to get sewn under the machine. Our goal is to match the end of the dart legs that I've got marked together, and then sew from the dart leg out to the dart apex. You'll be able to see this in a little bit more depth once we're over at the sewing machine. Here's a repeat of how I folded the dart. I pinched the apex, and then I matched the 2 clips of the end of the legs of the dart together. And I put a pin in place to hold it for when we go over to the sewing machine. When sewing darts, you never ever start at the tip. You always start at the base of the dart and sew toward the tip. My goal is to sew from the leg that I've already got under the presser foot out to the apex where the pin is there. I'm using a standard stitch length of 3, and I am going to back stitch at the front of the dart. If you're a more beginner sewer, I do recommend using some tailor chalk to draw a straight line from the start of your dart leg out to the dart apex. When you're about an inch away from the apex of your dart, you're going to turn your stitch length down to about a 2. Make it a little bit tighter. And you're going to stitch towards that apex, and you're going to stitch right off the edge of the fabric. No back stitching at the point. This will make your point look bumpy or not as nice as it could. In place of back stitching, you're going to take those tails and you're going to tie a knot at the tip of the dart. Now that we've done the stitching part of our dart, it's not fully complete until it's pressed. Another general rule of darts is we always press our darts towards the waistline. So if you've got horizontal darts, which we would consider this dart to be, we're going to press it downward or towards our waistline. And that little bit of extra fabric that you see sticking out, see how now it lays nice and flat with the side seam of our shirt? That's called the dart take-up. If you're ever making a garment with vertical darts, they're going to press towards the center of your body or inward. In a perfect world, I'd have a tailor ham to press my curve over, but I don't have one of those on hand. So since this isn't a really deep dart, a very curvy dart, I can press it flat on my ironing board. I'm also going to pin down that dart take-up for when I go to sew my side seams together. I know it can be a little bit hard to see where my dart is because of my dark print that I've chosen, but because it's a print, you can see where the print doesn't quite line up anymore because of the dart. What I'm looking for here is that my dart is nice and smooth and flat, and there's no puckers or wrinkles. You will, however, see now that the shirt does not lay perfectly flat on the ironing board anymore. It shouldn't, because this dart has put in a little bit of shape to our garment. We're no longer working in just a 2D plane. We've created some slight fitting around the bust that's very common among women's garments. The last part of our prepping is going to be putting the pleats in the back of the shirt. The back of the shirt is pattern piece 13, and the pleats are marked at center back. Pleats are small folds put into garments in order to create fullness in certain areas. In this case, we're doing a knife pleat. On each side of center front, we'll be folding the straight line over to the dotted line and pressing it in place. Let me demonstrate for you here with the pattern still attached so you have an idea for when we take the pattern away from the fabric. Also remember that we're going to do this on each side of center back, so it'll be a mirror effect. Let me start by marking my center back with a pin. Remember that the two clips I've made that are closest to the pin on each side are the straight line, and then the clip to the outside of that is the dotted line. We're going to fold the straight line over to the dotted line, pushing the pleat take-up back behind it. Again, I apologize if the dark fabric makes it a little bit hard to follow. I didn't realize how poorly it would read on camera, but if you get confused, just look at the print and you'll be able to see where the print breaks, and that's where the pleat is. Once I've pressed my pleat in place, I'm going to mark it with a pin, and I'm going to go ahead and repeat this step on the other side. I'm going to give one final press to the pleats just at the top of the garment. No need to press them all the way down the back of the shirt. And finally, our last step of prep work is to attach the yoke to the top of the back of the shirt. This will seal our pleats in place at center back. Once all of our pleats are in place, we're going to sew this seam at 5/8 of an inch, stitch length of 3. Now that my yoke is attached, I can press it open and flat. Now I know your brain may look at the pleats and want them to be touching at center back. Don't worry, the shirt is designed for them not to be touching there. Once you're done pressing the seam open, this does conclude our prep work and the end of video 1. When we move on to video 2, we will apply a seam finish to the seam. One of my students asked me a really great question yesterday. He said, why do we press it open and then only to close it again? That's because if you don't press it open, the seam ends up looking really puffy and very unprofessional. Thank you so much for stopping by Meghan Grace DIY and watching part 1 of my button-up shirt project. If you liked what you saw, please make sure you hit the subscribe and the notify button on your way out. And if you have any questions or ideas for tutorials, please feel free to put them in the comment section below. Also, feel free to check me out on Facebook, Instagram, and Pinterest. And as of recording this video, I have 8,679 subscribers. If you've made it this far in the video, then you'll be one of the first to know that at 10,000 subscribers, I'll be giving away a free sewing machine. Stay tuned for instructions on how to enter. And as always, happy sewing!